as a point. That is why we see the intersection of all forms of racism as a point of common unity that we must challenge together if we are to defeat the oppression against all communities. So when I refer to the term Black, I will be speaking about it in a political sense today. We are living in an age of racism, war, climate change, and COVID engulfing the globe. It is clear that the global capitalist system is allowing all of this to lock together in a downward spiral. In order to protect profit, I can think of no worse crime than to decide to profit from the death of destruction of war, when what we need is a war on COVID and climate change. How do we find ourselves protesting arms traders in London, a capital city that considers itself to be at the center of civilization and culture? Because it is also a city that has benefited from centuries of empire, the biggest swindling operation in history. The British Empire thrived and profited from divide and rule. And at the center of this criminal exploitation was war and racism, which dehumanized those that were colonized, enslaved, and exploited. And today, we are still dealing with that legacy. Let's never forget that the richest 8 billionaires in the world own the same wealth as the poorest half of the global population. How did they benefit from this system? Racism and war play a fundamental part in the DNA of profit-driven capitalism. From Nagasaki to the Ivory Coast, our lives are not valued. When it comes to military intervention, our lives lost in war and collateral damage, or so the newspapers' headlines say. In Iraq, many excuses were made to justify the invasion, from secret weapons to human rights violations. But the truth is, the only weapon of mass destruction is the region was the United States military. The single most dangerous force of the last few decades has been the US military and its allies. Thanks to Tony Blair, David Cameron have left behind the trail of destruction, of blood, of civilians killed by American soldiers in a state of panic, of desperate evacuees falling from planes where dogs had served seats, and hundreds of Afghans were crammed into the cargo bay. Let us talk about Afghanistan and the so-called war on terror, which cost 900 million. I'm dyslexic as hell, guys, sorry. 9,000 lives and $8 trillion. Where the Taliban now run the country and carry us US weapons, cars, bombs, and all left behind for them to help themselves to imperialism, war, booty. Afghanistan has resulted in all kinds of profit for the West, lining the pocket of politicians who moonlight as arms dealers and making weapons manufacturers like Lockheed Martin millions richer by the hour. And make no mistakes, the bombing and drone strikes and warfare have not ended with Afghanistan. There are still billions to be made from the colonial war machine. The US military has 800 bases around the world in Asia. Hundreds of billions are now going into building a nuclear missile chain encircling China. In Africa, AFRICOM continue its imperialist grip. For those of you who don't know, AFRICOM is the American military initiative to bring and enforce US foreign policy across the continent. There are over 8,000 troops stationed there to carry out almost 800 military projects, otherwise known as coups. Just 2 days ago, the US trained military of Guinea staged a coup to overthrow the government and seize power. There are no coincidences. Whether there is a conflict of coup or Oku, African can be found not too far behind. Western trained militants and death squad wreak havoc across Africa. African trained militaries and Western installed government continues to bow to the free market, to the IMF and World Bank. Instead of serving the people, revolutionary projects like Sankara's in Burkina Faso and Mandela's in South Africa are crushed under heavy weight of military intervention and electoral meddling. Countries like Haiti, Cuba, and Afghanistan are continuously intervened into a punish for daring to have tried to think differently. Well, the time has come to say enough is enough. Why? Because this is the battle between the billionaires and the billions of and the billions of people that they oppress. We are the billions, and together, unified, will win. This is why the Black Liberation Alliance believe in unity between our communities. The profit of the armed trade come from weapons sold and used against people who look like us. The majority of those weapons were made with the raw material from our countries. In its disguise that they are then sold back as weapons, and innocent people pay the price for them with their lives. Warfare costs the planet too. Even climate change cannot be separated from the legacies of imperialism. Don't forget the US military is bigger a polluter than 140 entire countries combined together. The war on Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iraq, Syria alone have produced 400 million tons of CO2 emissions. We have less than a decade left to stop runaway climate change. Yet again, it is the global South and the Black communities that will pay the highest price for this crisis, which was not their making. The global South needs a reparation now for slavery, colonialism, and climate change. But to those who don't agree, you don't need to think about anyone other than yourselves, because I'm very clear. If we don't stop the forest fires in the Amazon, we curse ourselves with the floods in Britain. Because the link between both is the rising temperature, which is lead to the melting ice caps, which raise the sea levels. What we need is global cooperation, not rallying cries for war and scapegoating of migrants. Imagine if instead a war was launched on climate change, poverty, and COVID. Imagine a world where people wouldn't have to go hungry in Britain. Students wouldn't be weighed down by thousands of pounds in debt. The NHS wouldn't be swamp, the world where trillions of taxpayer money aren't pumped into Trident and instead used to support the underfunded, overworked NHS, where everyone can access free healthcare. And when I say free healthcare, I truly mean it. It doesn't mean where pregnant migrants are checked by the receptionist. When I say free healthcare, I mean where migrants with diabetes can access their insulin without having to worry about the prescription charge. When I say free NHS, I mean where everyone in this country can access it freely and without having to worry where the next 20 quid is gonna come from to pay for their prescription. A world where refugees and asylum seekers are treated with dignity and respect, not cast out from the very country that bombed and displaced them. There is a similar connection with COVID. What happened in the rest of the world affects us directly here in Britain. We are more connected than ever before, but at the very time that the West should be donating vaccine to the global South, it is exporting weapons, where China is pledging $31 million in direct aid to Afghanistan. The EU ring fencing millions to put Afghan refugees in detention camp across Central Asia. When Britain should be compensating the global South with green technology, it is cutting its foreign aid budget and paying Macron to keep refugees away from British borders. It is laughable to think that the British government can find time to debate the humanity of those overseas and decide whether or not to airstrike civilians home. But there is no room to debate the astronomical hike in housing and living costs against stagnating wages of precarious employment contract. It cannot cough up the coin to impose rent moratorium or mandate sick pay for Black frontline workers. Workers don't have to choose between cash or catching COVID. On one, this is clear, the leaders of the West see Black people as less human, less equal, and more expendable. Now, more than ever, we need a multipolar world that is defined by connection, not conflict. I was inspired by the Palestinian facing tear gas who tweeted the BLM movement in Ferguson, protesting the murder of Michael Brown in 2014, showing them solidarity and advising them on how to deal with tear gas. The kind of armed traders who we are protesting today profit from the misery that their weapon inflicts on the Palestinian and African American. This is why we need to shut them down. I'm inspired by the global Black Lives Matter movement, which toppled Trump in the US and is toppling racist statues. Let's not stop until we have toppled racism everywhere. Let's not stop until people and the planet are put first. And that starts with exposing, shaming, and shutting down the arms traders that profit from the promote mass destruction. Right now, our Prime Minister is congratulating himself on leading the world as the COP26 talk are about to happen in Britain. All the while he is presiding over plans to drill oil in Scotland, Surrey, Cumbria, and extract gas in Mozambique in a project that will increase climate wrecking emission and result in more conflict over natural resources. I stand with everyone here today who want to see a world free from conflict, war and the arms trade. On their side is the mainstream media, millionaires, and the government that support them. On our side is the majority of humanity. We are on the right side of history. And we have to remember that in the struggle and campaign that are to come, when they said that women could not have the vote, the LGBT plus rights were unnatural, the segregation and the apartheid were normal, they will prove wrong because resilient people who knew they were right never gave up. That is exactly what we need to do right now. The Black Liberation Alliance look forward to joining with you and showing you solidarity in the struggles that are to come. We have the world to win, the future of humanity to save, and the children of today and tomorrow to stand witness. I need to be able to say to my young son and his generation that we fought to put the world right where everything was going wrong. Please follow the Black Liberation Alliance on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And I'm just looking forward to have an amazing day with you. And I truly, truly thank Malak and everyone at Cat University for putting this together. In this time, it's more than needed for people to come together, organize and mobilize. There is no time of sitting around because the planet, the world, people, marginalized people need us to stand up for more than ever against this brutal government and the West, because people are dying from left, right, center, and it's our duty to stand up and fight. Thank you for having me.